No one could say the exact moment she disappeared. There were no screams, no alarms, no frantic running through the hallways, just silence. One of those heavy silences that lingers long after the sound has stopped. She went in alone to visit her hospitalized grandfather and simply ... never came out. The clocks kept ticking, the monitors kept beeping, the staff continued sipping their rushed coffees as usual, but the girl, in a blue dress, white shoes, and frightened eyes, dissolved somewhere between the door of room 12 and the real world. The mother screamed, the father pleaded, the nurses searched cabinets, bathrooms, stretchers, storage rooms, nothing. It was as if she had never set foot there. Only the visitor log held her name, like a cruel reminder that, yes, she went in, and never came out. The hospital activated a maximum security protocol. Police were called, interviews, news reports, promises of resolution, but everything slowly withered, like the flowers she carried to give her grandfather, who would die 2 days later, never knowing she had been there. Over time, room 12 was emptied, then isolated, then sealed. Some said it was out of respect for the family, others whispered that nurses no longer felt comfortable entering. They spoke of unexplained drafts, shadows on cameras, toys that would suddenly appear on the bed covered with clean sheets. Even the door number was changed, but those who worked there knew that was still room 12, and the girl's absence was too solid a presence to be forgotten. The wing where she disappeared was renovated over the years. New floors, repainted walls, updated equipment. But her room always had something out of place. A light bulb that burned out too quickly, a device that froze without reason, a file that vanished from the system, as if the space itself refused to be erased, as if she, somehow, was still there, suspended between a time that doesn't move and a fate that never arrived. 40 years passed, 4 entire decades during which the hospital changed management, colors, even its name, but the room remained locked, not by protocol, but by a kind of fear that was never recorded on paper, a fear shared between shifts and silences, because, from time to time, someone swore they saw a child in the glass of the door, a quick silhouette, a glint of childish eyes watching the world through the cracks of a time that no longer belonged to her. The girl's family gradually fell apart. The father died without ever returning to the hospital. The mother, now in a nursing home, repeats her daughter's name like a broken prayer. The older sister moved abroad. No one talks about it anymore. No one visits the old wing, until one sweltering summer morning, on an ordinary shift, with apathetic staff and cold coffee in the thermos, an alarm went off in the security room. The motion sensor in room 12 was triggered, for no reason, with no registered entry. The nurse, who responded to the call, expected to find a cat, a rat, or a technical glitch. She unlocked the door for the first time in 40 years. The latch creaked like a forgotten scream. And there, standing in the middle of the room, was the girl, same clothes, same hair tied with a ribbon, same frightened look. Numbered wrinkles, no dirt, no mark of time. As if she had just walked in seconds earlier. As if the entire interval between disappearance and reunion had been just the blink of an eye. The woman fell to her knees, unable to speak. The girl looked around, blinked, like someone waking from a deep dream, and asked in a thin voice, "Where is Grandpa?" It took 4 nurses to contain the collective hysteria. The girl didn't know what a cell phone was. Didn't recognize anything in the hospital. She still thought it was 1985, and more frightening, when they looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, it didn't appear. The glass showed only the room. Nothing else. The child was taken for psychiatric evaluation. Doctors, journalists, and investigators rushed back to the hospital. But what happened in that room still has no explanation. Her tests came back normal. She showed no signs of malnutrition, trauma, or aging. Her fingerprints matched the original visitor record. Her DNA matched that of her mother and sister. And even so, nothing explained her presence there. Intact, frozen in time. In the first days, she spoke little, only drew pictures, closed her eyes when they tried to film her, answered questions with scattered phrases, said things like, "I couldn't leave, the door disappeared," or "There was a man who told me to wait, but he had no face." No adult could hear what she said without getting chills. A doctor requested leave. An imaging technician fainted. During an MRI, the hospital was sealed again. The images from the wing's cameras showed something even more disturbing. At the exact moment the door was opened and the girl was found. There was a power failure in all the cardiac monitors in the pediatric ward. One by one, all the devices shut off and came back after 7 minutes. The reception clock read 3:14, the same time she had disappeared for decades earlier. From that day on, things began happening more frequently. Patients reported dreams of a girl walking the halls. Nurses saw reflections that didn't match reality. Her file, kept in a dead archive, appeared printed on the director's desk, even though it was locked in a cabinet, and the drawings she made showed a hospital identical to the current one, but seen from above, like a detailed map she could never have known. On the night of the 5th day after her return, she disappeared again. Her mother was being brought from the nursing home to see her, and as they prepared the room, the girl simply said, "He called me back. I can't stay long." And she smiled. When the nurse returned with the juice, the stretcher was empty, the door locked. No sound, no steps, just the blue ribbon on the floor, like a reminder that time, sometimes, has a will of its own. The hospital fell silent again, and once more, they sealed the room. Once more, they changed its number. But this time, they knew it was useless. Because the story was already too alive, already too deeply rooted. And that girl, whoever or whatever she was, never really left. She just waited for the right moment to be noticed again. Since the second disappearance, the tension that once slowly crept through the hallways thickened like a fog that refuses to lift. It was no longer about a missing girl or an old case resurfacing out of nowhere. It was about something that logic couldn't grasp, something that moved through the gaps of what could be explained. Staff began having difficulty even looking at the room, even from afar. It wasn't necessary to be inside it to feel the discomfort. Sometimes, just walking nearby was enough to make the skin crawl, as if the air was thick with a dampness that didn't come from the weather, but from a suspended memory waiting to be relived. Even the most skeptical avoided the old hallways at night. Shifts were rearranged so no one would pass near the old pediatric wing alone. A new nurse, unaware of the details of the story, got lost while looking for the cafeteria and walked past room 12 without realizing it. When he returned, he was pale as paper and shaking. He said he saw a girl sitting on the edge of the bed, swinging her legs and humming something softly. The problem was, the door was locked with chains, and no access alarm had been triggered. This time, the administration decided to keep the case under absolute secrecy, not out of respect for the family, which had long dissolved into silence and grief, but out of fear of scandal. A hospital involved in a 4-decade mystery, with witnesses claiming to have seen the same child twice. 40 years apart, this couldn't be revealed without irreparable consequences. All the cameras in the wing were deactivated. The patient's physical files were collected, and her digital records erased. But the more they tried to bury the story, the deeper its roots seemed to grow. Some staff began reporting time lost. A nurse claimed she spent only 10 minutes organizing medication in the wing, and, upon returning, discovered that 2 hours had passed. Another, while trying to make coffee, realized that all the clocks had stopped. When he checked his phone, the time had also frozen, but as soon as he left the area, everything returned to normal. These incidents began happening more frequently, always at the same point in the building, the former axis of the pediatric wing, where room 12 used to be. During an emergency renovation in the neighboring wing, workers broke through an old wall and found, embedded between the structures, a perfectly preserved teddy bear. No dust, nowhere. It was clean, with its tag intact, and had a blue ribbon sewn onto its paw, exactly like the one the girl used to wear in her hair. When they tried to take the object for analysis, the room's power systems shut off. When the lights came back on, the teddy bear had vanished. In the spot where it had been, a single handwritten sheet of paper read, "She's still waiting for the visit to end." The reports became more visual. Nursing technicians, during their rounds, saw a girl's shadow passing through closed doors. Comatose patients whispered her name. One of them, with no history of neurological issues, woke up and murmured, "She's hiding behind the curtain." When the room was checked, no one was there. But the curtain was indeed swaying, even though the windows were sealed. A renowned neurologist, brought in to study the reports, left the hospital 3 days later and refused to speak publicly about the case. During the early hours of a Friday morning, all the heart monitors on the second floor went off simultaneously. No cardiac arrests occurred. No patient died, but every single one of them reported the same dream. They were in a dark room, with a bed in the center, and a girl asking not to be forgotten. The physical description provided by each matched the appearance of the girl who had vanished 40 years earlier. None of them knew each other. None had access to the case history. The hospital hired a third-party security company to investigate the phenomena. Infrared cameras, motion sensors, and hidden audio devices were discreetly installed overnight. The captured footage showed unexplainable thermal fluctuations precisely at 3:14 every day. One of the sensors recorded the presence of a small figure with a body temperature below normal, standing in front of the old room 12 for over 7 minutes. She didn't move, didn't breathe, she just was. A psychologist, after hearing the reports, suggested it might be an extreme case of collective hysteria, worsened by decades of unresolved silence. But his analysis crumbled under the weight of his own nightmare after visiting the hallway where the girl was last seen. He woke up screaming, said he had dreamed of being trapped in an empty hospital, with all doors locked except one, room 12, and inside, a girl stared at him without blinking. While the wall clocks melted to the sound of an irregular beep, the manifestations began to follow a cycle. Always 7 days between one event and the next. Always in multiples of 7. The number repeated itself in power outages, in the durations of silences caught on camera, in the minutes doors stayed unlocked on their own. When they started cross-checking the data, they realized the pattern also existed in the past. She disappeared on the 7th day of the 7th month, and room 12 was originally the 7th room on the left of the main hallway. Nothing seemed random. It was as if everything had been designed by someone, or something. What was the girl doing during those intervals? Where did she go? Why did she return only when the time struck exactly 3:14? And why, even after 4 decades, was her presence still so physical, so dense, so real that every sensor continued to register it? The police tried to review all the wing's cameras from that day. There weren't many. In 1985, internal surveillance was still rudimentary, mostly done through manual records. Even so, they found a tape, an old VHS surveillance reel, dated the same day Clara entered the hospital. The footage, however, was corrupted until a specialist managed to extract a few seconds of image. The video showed Clara standing in front of room 312's door, looking directly at the camera. She didn't seem scared, but she wasn't smiling either. She just observed. Then, with a slow, almost ritualistic motion, she turned the doorknob and entered. After that static 40 minutes of white noise, as if time had frozen on the tape. When the image returned, the door was closed again, but Clara never came out. Her parents were called, of course. The hospital was already in turmoil, nurses being interrogated, doctors reviewing reports. Clara's mother screamed, begged, ran through the corridors shouting her daughter's name as if she could pull her back just by the sound of her voice. The father, in shock, tried to find rational explanations until he realized there was no logic to any of it. How could a child disappear inside a room? Where were the open windows, the hidden passageways, the maintenance hatches? But there was nothing. Room 312 was a concrete capsule with a single door in and out. And still, Clara was no longer there. The grandfather she had gone to visit died that same night, alone. No records of delirium, no shouting, no agitation. Just a monitor showing a flat line at 3:14 a.m., the same time stamped on Clara's last access card swipe. No nurse reported unusual movement in the room. No equipment was found damaged. Nothing indicated anything out of the ordinary, except the fact that a child entered and never came out. From that point on, the room was sealed a symbolic way, to preserve a kind of sanctuary of pain. But over time, the pain was forgotten, and the room was reopened. 40 years later, the hospital was no longer the same, renovated, modernized, with new protocols, a new name, new administration. Many didn't even know Clara's story. Room 312 had become part of a regular post-operative ward. It had been used hundreds of times by different people with different lives, without any incident, until a nurse named Lucia reported something strange during a night shift. She entered the room to deliver medication to an elderly man, and, as she left, felt a deep chill. When she looked back, she saw the door closing on its own, with an almost ceremonial slowness. Inside, she heard footsteps, She ran back. There was no one there but the patient, sleeping peacefully. Lucia's report might have been ignored if not for what happened the next night. At exactly 3:14 a.m., that same patient's heart monitor alarm went off. When the team rushed to the room, he was in cardiac arrest. After resuscitation, still intubated, the man mumbled something inaudible. But when they managed to catch it, he kept repeating one phrase: "The girl is back. The girl is back." No one knew what it meant. He had no young relatives, no visitors. He had been alone since admission. But the phrase stuck, like a seed no one knew who had planted. The next day, the room was closed indefinitely for sanitization. But the rumors had already spread. Older nurses began pulling records, asking about the room's past, and an older nursing assistant, Donna Rosa, shared something she had never told anyone. She had been a trainee in 1985, the day Clara disappeared. She remembered the commotion clearly, the mother's screams, the tape with interference, and she added after that night, she was never able to enter the room again without getting chills. "That place was never empty again," she said. "Just because we can't see, doesn't mean it's unoccupied." The administration ignored it, thought it was exaggeration, coincidence. But that same week, a new patient was admitted to room 312, a 79-year-old woman, lucid, hospitalized for respiratory complications. At 3:14 a.m., the emergency call button was triggered. When the staff arrived, they found the patient standing, facing the wall opposite the bed. They asked if she was okay. She just turned her face and said, "She's here, but she no longer understands what time is." After that, she lost the ability to speak. Next morning, the patient was transferred to another room, but the electronic records began to fail. Admission reports disappeared from the system. Camera footage vanished. Shift schedules became scrambled, and without explanation, the name Clara began appearing on forms for newly admitted patients, as if it had been accidentally typed into the ID fields, but no one had typed it. No one even remembered what the girl's face looked like. And yet, everyone began to dream about her. One of the maintenance technicians, assigned to check the wing's sensors, decided to test the heat detector in room 312. The device, calibrated to detect human bodies, beeped 3 times in empty areas of the room, specifically, on the bed, in the corner near the window, and behind the door. Curious, the technician activated thermal vision mode. 3 silhouettes appeared, and in the bottom corner of the screen, the device registered a word, desynchronized. He had never seen that alert before. The manual didn't mention that function, but the image remained, and so did the memory. Days later, Nurse Lucia, the first to report the door's strange behavior. She said she was hearing whispers in the locker room, disconnected phrases, a child's voice, the sound of footsteps in empty corridors. On her last day, she left a note for management. She didn't return. She's still returning. The phrase stayed on the wall for weeks before someone removed it. But among the staff, it became a kind of silent password, a mutual acknowledgement that something was wrong. Something everyone knew but no one would say aloud. The hospital called for a technical audit. Psychologists, engineers, administrators, all tried to find a logical explanation for the recent events. Nothing was identified as a fault. No leaks, no interference, no external agents. But the night before the audit concluded, another incident occurred. At 3:14 a.m., the light in room 312 turned on by itself. The security camera recorded only static. When the image returned, there was a girl sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to the camera, dressed in clothes from another era, and for 7 seconds, she turned toward the camera, smiled, then the image cut out. The security team was called immediately after the footage was reviewed. When they arrived at room 312, the bed was empty, the sheets untouched, and there was no sign that anyone had been there. No footprints, no impressions on the mattress, no noises picked up by the sensors. But what most intrigued everyone present was the smell in the air, a mix of old disinfectant, like those used in the 1980s, and something sweeter resembling aged children's perfume. The scent was strong and seemed concentrated in the exact spot where the figure had been seen on the camera. The administration tried to suppress the case. The records from that early morning were removed from the system, but rumors spread quickly among the staff. Many began avoiding room 312. Others refused to work in that wing during the night shift. Schedules started being swapped, rosters restructured. A growing tension took over the hospital, especially among the older employees. Some began reporting recurring dreams about a girl walking down dark corridors, holding a teddy bear. She didn't speak, she only pointed at locked doors. A newly hired nurse, unaware of the story, was assigned to organize the hospital's physical records. Among the old papers, she found a file folder with no label. Inside, there was only a yellowed sheet with the word Clara written in blue ink. Nothing else. No medical history, no date, no registration number. Curious, she brought the paper to the administration. When they searched the system, there was no Clara in the current database. However, upon checking the physical archives from 1985, they found the name no photo, but with birth date and parents' names. It was real. Trying to better understand what was happening, one of the most skeptical doctors, Dr. Tavares, decided to spend a night at the hospital, analyzing the data. During the first hours, nothing happened. But at 3:14 a.m., he felt a sudden dizziness and a drop in temperature in the room he was in. He tried to call reception, but the phone was dead. Upon leaving his office, he heard light footsteps. He followed the sound through the corridors, calling out. As he turned a corner, he saw, for a split second, a girl standing in front of room 312's door. She looked at him and went in. When he ran to catch up, the door was locked, and on the other side, total silence. After this episode, Dr. Tavares began losing sleep. He reported fragmented dreams, memories of places he had never been. One night, he called the night shift supervisor and said he needed to take a leave. Before hanging up, he said something that was recorded in the internal phone system. She didn't stop in time. Time stopped because of her. That put everyone on alert. Even those who didn't believe began avoiding the topic. It was as if talking about Clara brought her closer, as if she only existed where she was remembered. That an IT technician was assigned to review the hospital's files from 1985. While combing through old hard drives, he found a hidden folder labeled Visitor. Inside, several corrupted files and 3 recoverable images. In all of them, the same girl appeared, sitting in different hospital chairs, looking into the camera. The problem was, the images were dated from different years, 1993, 2004, and 2017. Clara never aged, and her presence, though invisible in daily life, seemed to maintain a steady rhythm across decades. It was around that time that reports began surfacing outside the hospital. An elderly woman called the administration saying she had seen a girl sitting at the bus stop in front of the hospital for 3 nights in a row. The child didn't speak, didn't interact, just stared at the building's facade. Always at 3:14 a.m., when asked to describe the girl's appearance, her description matched Clara's perfectly, including the outfit, a light blue dress with white details, exactly as described by her mother in the 1985 missing person report. A group of former employees decided to meet and share stories. Each had a different memory, but all agreed on one point. Whenever something strange happened in the hospital, a door could be heard creaking somewhere out of physical reach, as if there was an invisible door between worlds, being opened and closed. This theory gained traction when a former nurse said that for years, she heard a girl's voice calling her name from the back of the women's locker room, but she never found anyone. Older administrators suggested shutting down the entire wing. There was growing concern that the events would begin affecting patients directly, but one issue prevented a final decision. There was no physical proof that Clara had returned. Everything was based on reports, blurry images, subjective sensations. Still, a decision was made in secret to transfer all patients from the area surrounding room 312 to other hospital sections, gradually emptying the hallway. Within days, that stretch became the quietest part of the entire building. It was in that silence that something happened. A resident doctor, on her first shift in the now deactivated wing, decided to rest for a few minutes. She sat in the empty hallway, listening to the distant hum of machines. She closed her eyes and felt something touch her shoulder. When she opened them, she saw only the shadow of what seemed to be a girl turning the corner. She tried to follow, but found only walls and a locked door. Hours later, when reviewing the security footage, her own silhouette was seen sitting on the floor, but the touch wasn't visible. Only a slight shift in lighting, as if a shadow slid along the wall and reached her. The hospital began registering punctual electrical failures always at the same time. Clocks froze, alarms went off without reason, and on 3 occasions, the word Clara appeared printed on medical reports instead of the patient's names. No doctor admitted to writing it. No machines showed any malfunction at the time of printing. The papers were collected and filed, but strangely, 2 of them disappeared. A former patient, who had once stayed in room 312 years earlier, returned to the hospital after a domestic accident. During his stay, upon seeing the old corridor, he turned pale. He said he remembered a girl standing by his bed during the night. He thought it was a dream. But after overhearing nurses talking about Clara's story, he had a nervous breakdown. He was sedated, and while asleep, he muttered, "She doesn't understand that her grandpa is already dead." The phrase left the staff stunned. A local historian, after hearing rumors about the hospital, decided to investigate the origins of room 312. He discovered that the space had been built over an old isolation wing used in the 1940s. That specific room had never been used until renovations in the 1980s. There was a kind of taboo among the workers of that time, who considered the space too cold and too quiet to house any patient. No technical reasons were recorded, just the perception that the room shouldn't be used. That same historian requested access to the death records from the 1940s. Among the documents, he found an incomplete file for an elderly patient who died on the exact same day Clara disappeared, 40 years earlier. The name, Manuel Cardoso, Clara's grandfather. The chronological coincidence was absurd. How could the same man have died twice, in 2 different years? The 1985 date appeared in all modern records, but there, in that yellowed archive, was a name, a surname, and a date, April 12, 1945. That data alone reopened the entire time theory. What if Clara hadn't simply vanished? What if she had crossed a fold-in space inside the hospital itself? What if room 312 wasn't just a room but a fragment of time, endlessly reenacting the same scene? Everything began pointing to a single hypothesis. Clara wasn't lost. She was in a cycle, an endless loop, where the reunion with her grandfather hadn't been interrupted by death but preserved by the very nature of the room. The hospital, unknowingly, had kept that moment frozen for decades. And any emotional or physical proximity to that space acted as a trigger to bring her back, even if only in fragments. The administrative board, faced with increasingly difficult events to cover up, decided not to intervene anymore. No official statement was made, no emergency meeting scheduled. Silence became policy. And it was in this silence that the hospital began to change from the inside. There was a perceptible aura, even to the most skeptical eyes. Those who passed through the wing, where room 312 had been sealed, felt a kind of pressure on their chest, as if something in that space refused to be forgotten. And no matter how many documents were erased, files destroyed, or memories suppressed, a cycle remained. A constant return to the origin. DOP staff began reporting phenomena during shift changes. The reception clocks would strike 3:14, and at that instant the camera images would distort for exactly 7 seconds. Nothing could be seen, but everyone without exception who looked directly at the monitor at that moment reported feeling a presence, a chill on the back of the neck, a whisper behind the ear. It was always the same pattern, the same timing, as if an invisible hand turned the dials of reality just to remind them that Clara was still nearby. That time, for her, had not passed, but for the others, it was only beginning to unravel. That in the pediatric wing, a 7-year-old girl drew, on her occupational therapy sheet, a scene no adult could ignore. It was the hospital, seen from the outside, on a dark night. In one of the windows, a glowing figure. When asked who it was, she replied, "It's the girl who's already been here, but hasn't finished visiting her grandpa yet." The phrase was noted in her medical chart, but none of the professionals present ever forgot the calm tone with which she spoke, as if it were obvious, as if Clara were part of the hospital's structure, like the tiles, the corridors, the muffled sound of monitors. There was a moment, weeks later, when Clara's image appeared clearly. A security camera installed in an empty exam room captured her presence clearly for the first time in 40 years. She was not looking at the camera. She was looking at a fixed point outside the field of view, with a calm expression. She held something in her hands, a teddy bear, the same one described by her mother at the time of the disappearance. Then, slowly, she walked out of frame. When the technician reviewing the footage paused the video on that specific frame, he noticed something strange in the reflection on the glass door. The figure of her grandfather, sitting, waiting. That image was not shared with anyone outside the most restricted circle, but it began to circulate on flash drives among staff members. Everyone who saw it reported feeling something different. Some cried without knowing why. Others reported headaches or trouble sleeping, but the most common reaction was vivid dreams, not of Clara, but of the hospital itself. Corridors that twisted, doors that led to impossible rooms, elevators that descended to non-existent floors. It was as if the hospital were absorbing foreign memories to keep her presence alive. In an attempt to break the cycle, administration removed all old objects from the hospital. Heirlooms, old documents, photographs, furniture from past decades, everything was catalogued and removed. But even after the cleansing, Clara continued to appear, and worse, she began to appear in places she had never been before. Cameras, in administrative areas, newly built sectors, even the parking lot. Her presence no longer followed spatial logic. It was as if, now, Clara had integrated herself into the emotional structure of the building, as if she had found a new way to manifest through the collective memory of those who knew her story. Then, records began to erase themselves. Data about the disappearance, old reports, medical files, everything began to vanish from the databases, as if being deleted by some internal force. Backups failed, servers crashed. Nothing could be recovered, and when one of the technicians tried to access the last version of the 1985 report, the screen flickered, and a single word appeared before the system shut down completely. "I've arrived." No one attempted to access that system again. The effects began reaching patients. 3 people hospitalized in different sectors reported the same thing. Voices at night calling their names. One patient claimed to have seen the girl standing at the door, saying, "Your name is almost ready." The psychiatrist noted the phrase, but there was no rational explanation. The next patient, an elderly man, said the girl was writing a list. When asked what the list was for, he answered, "Of who will remember first." The psychologist following the cases had an emotional breakdown. She requested immediate leave. Before leaving, she wrote a letter with a single sentence. "I dreamed of the end. It's not an end with death. It's an end with return." No one understood at the time, but when the hospital began to record a new phenomenon, clocks counting backward between 3:13 and 3:14, that sentence began to make sense. It was as if time were reorganizing itself, folding around that specific minute. Everything converged there. Everything happened there. The next night, a resident doctor heard noises coming from the sealed hallway. He took his badge and went to investigate. When he arrived, he found the wall where room 312 had been sealed open. There were no signs of forced entry, no alarms triggered. But there was a corridor where there should have been solid concrete. He entered the hospital's sensors lost track of him for 4 minutes. When he reappeared, he was in the cafeteria, sitting, with blood on his hands. In his lap, a folded sheet of paper with the word "Remember" written in red ink. The blood wasn't his dot. The hospital entered operational collapse. Nurses requested mass transfers. Doctors claimed exhaustion. Patients were treated by emergency teams. The old wing was completely shut down and removed from internal maps. But Clara did not leave. On the contrary, she became even more present. She was on bulletin boards that used to display notices, in mirrors that fogged up by themselves, in dreams that repeated night after night. More and more, everyone there was certain that Clara had not merely returned, she had never left. She had waited, and now she was waiting again. And no matter how hard the hospital tried to deny it, Clara had become a symbol, a reminder, a warning. Her name, whispered in the corridors, silenced conversations. Her image, even when invisible, was felt. She was in every power outage, in every missing document, in every drop of old ether that appeared without explanation. Room 312 no longer existed physically, but it existed in time. And time, in that hospital, no longer followed the same hands of the clock, because time, as everyone who worked there came to learn, doesn't heal everything. Sometimes, it just waits, and sometimes, it comes back,